Strong, stiff, rugged and reliable, ready for mud, sand, rock and snow.
5 years ago in a pub in London, Jim Ratcliffe announced a very bold but very personal ambition to build the world's purest 4x4. A no-frills, uncompromising, really capable, reliable off-road utility vehicle inspired by the great 4x4 legends of the past, but better.
Hey guys, Stefan Fischer here from All Off Road. I hope you guys are well. In today's video I want to have another look at the Ineos Grenadier. Given that the car is ready for production and the first Grenadiers should be in Australian customers' hands by the end of the year, I thought it's worthwhile having another look and see whether it's really the perfect four-wheel drive I hoped it would be and what Ineos it advertised to be. So in this video I will focus on the shortcomings from a four-wheel driver's perspective and will explain why I think it's not the perfect four-wheel drive. Before we start, I would like to address a few comments from my first Ineos Grenadier video. Few people commented that the way how I have my car set up, they never come out of a showroom like that. And yes, that is 100% correct. I never expected the Ineos to come out of the showroom with 35s and set up to my likings. However, what I did expect is to have just a beautiful modular platform which ticks all the basic boxes for four-wheel drive and will be fairly easy to modify. And in that regards, in my opinion, the Ineos Grenadier version 1 has quite a few shortcomings. And then some people watch my videos of technical driving and I had quite a few pretty crazy vehicles, a Land Rover on 37s with portal axles, with rear steer. I had a Jeep on 37-inch tires. And I want to make it very clear, I never evaluated the Ineos Grenadier anywhere in that category. I'm only looking at the Ineos Grenadier as my long-range tourer. To understand where my opinions and assessments are coming from, you need to know about my background and experience. If you are a previous visitor of my channel, you can use the chapter markers to jump ahead. But if you are new to my channel, here's a quick rundown. I have owned various four-wheel drives for the past 22 years, but started seriously getting into four-wheel driving in 2011. Like with most things I do, I went into these with full steam and soon went from the occasional trip to weekly four-wheel driving, and I also started modifying my vehicles to better suit what I do. I soon also started technical four-wheel driving, which I found very complementary and skill building for my touring. I realized quickly this is not a good idea to do with a touring vehicle, so I have bought, built and modified a selection of road legal play trucks. I have been involved in various four-wheel drive clubs as well as the New South Wales Four-Wheel Drive Association as an accredited driver trainer and assessor. I have provided four-wheel drive training at a club level and for commercial operators. I spend around 3 to 4 months per year touring Australia for the past 10 years. From remote, trackless desert regions and beaches to iconic places like Tasmania and Fraser Island. And of course, I have documented these all on my YouTube channel, so browse around and see where I'm coming from. Sir Jim Ratcliffe recently mentioned in an interview that he built the car based on 3 pillars, because he reckons if that 3 pillars are right, the car should be successful.
I had reliability, off-road capability and looks.
To be honest, for a really purpose-built four-wheel drive, I think he missed a few points there, which in my book even more important than looks, because let's face it, there are quite a few cars where looks is kind of questionable. Even my 105 Land Cruiser, when I got it, I thought it was damn ugly, especially in comparison to my old Defender. But again, you know, the looks grows on you once you modify it, once you have it on a bit bigger tires and so on. it becomes more appealing in my book. Obviously, far more important, it becomes more functional. Every single modification I have made to any of my cars were always for purpose and never to look good or different. But in saying that, I don't mind the look of the new Grenadier, even though it's nothing revolutionary. Let's be honest here, it borrowed a lot of design cues from the old Defender. However, looking alright is certainly a bonus, but just not the most important thing for me. So I reckon Sir Jim Ratcliffe simplified what is essential in a four-wheel drive a little too much, and hopefully in version 2 or 3 these kind of shortcomings will be rectified and we really see a purpose-built four-wheel drive which you can drive out of the showroom, option to your needs, and just use it for its intended purpose. So let's now have a look into the issues which in my opinion prevent the Ineos Grenadier from being the perfect four-wheel drive. Let's get into it. A comfortable driver seating position is paramount, especially for long trips. From experience, I know that you can put up with non-ergonomical seating positions in the short term. However, for longer trips, this is a real deal breaker. Unfortunately, the Grenadier likely has a significant ergonomical issue with the right-hand side driving position. There is a big obstruction in the footwell for your left foot due to the room needed for the manifold pipe. I unfortunately did not jump in the driver's seat on my drive day, but let me quickly show you what another YouTuber who is much shorter than me thought when he sat in it.
It has a strange driving position. The brake pedal is where my accelerator would normally be. The accelerator is far that way and it has a footrest which is turning my body at an angle. It's actually
If someone quite short has issues by just jumping into the seat, I'm pretty sure it would not be suitable for me on long touring drives. My Discovery 2 also had a little angled driving position, and after a day of technical driving it became very uncomfortable. So for a tourer that is a no-go for me. It may be a little smaller in the final version, who knows, but given the room is needed for the exhaust pipe, it is quite likely it will remain intrusive. Just have a look here at my Land Cruiser and the space and setup, and then compare that to the Ineos Grenadier. The Grenadier looks very cramped and uncomfortable. To be honest, the Grenadier reminds me a lot of my Pinzgauer 718 footwell space, and that was one of the reasons why I sold the car again, because it just didn't have enough room in the footwell. A comfortable ergonomical seating position is paramount for a tourer, so from what I have seen so far, I think it may not be suitable for taller people. I'm also not 100% sure in regards to the rear seat seating position. With the seat in front of me put forward, I definitely had enough space for my long legs. However, I did sit in a very upright position. I'm not sure how comfortable that is for long touring. Similar to an old Defender, the side windows are mounted very low and someone of my height can actually not look straight out of the window, which can become a bit annoying, especially on longer trips. Given my kids are getting taller and older, I'm not so sure where that would be a good solution. The second big issue for me is the fuel capacity and touring range. The standard fuel tank of 90 litre is way too small for any reasonable touring in Australia. And the problem is that there is not much room underneath to easily fit an auxiliary tank. Really, the only available space I could see would mean rerouting the rear double exhaust system and having the tank in the rear where the now very low hanging rear guard is. But this is also where I assume you have the AdBlue tanks in the diesel version, so the room is very limited. Ineos itself has no extended or auxiliary fuel tank as an option. Aftermarket companies are usually not that quick in developing new things for small-scale new vehicles, so it would not surprise me if you need to wait for a year or two before you get an aftermarket option. If an extended main fuel tank would be released at some stage, it would further decrease the already low ground clearance. I think it shows the Grenadier is designed and developed in Europe, which has very different requirements for a four-wheel drive and utility vehicle, like for instance Australia, South Africa or the USA. Keep in mind, most good four-wheel drives we drive here in Australia were never really available in Europe. As an example, here's my Land Cruiser 105, and you can see that I easily can carry 260 liters of fuel and an additional 44 liters of water in aftermarket tanks, which are readily available and bolt on. You can also see that both of them don't hang too low and do not much affect the ramp over or the departure angle. I think it shows here that the designer of the Grenadier had never designed a car, let alone a four-wheel drive before. In my opinion, there is not enough room between the car floor and the bottom of the frame, resulting in too little space for the required components like fuel tanks. Have a look at this comparison, which shows you the option of additional fuel tanks for other vehicles. I also show the price and the curb weight, GVM and the payload for each car. One thing to note is that the Ineos is the second heaviest car in the bunch. Only the Nissan Patrol Y62 is slightly heavier. However, the Grenadier does have a very good payload. Ineos has kept reasonably quiet what differential locks are in the Grenadier. You really can only find it if you look through the fine print. I asked Ineos Australia to clarify, but unfortunately never received a response. In my opinion, the standard Harrop-Eaton e-locker is not a good product due to the way how it operates and disengages at most directional changes. And in particular for a supposedly purpose-built four-wheel drive, where you could assume that the differential locks are often engaged. I made a dedicated video about its shortcomings and where I compare the e-locker against the TJM Pro locker and ARB Air locker. Make sure to check it out. The Harrop-Eaton e-locker is a differential lock I have seen fail the most, and I personally know at least a dozen people who have had the Harrop-Eaton e-lockers fail and eventually replaced them. Eaton also has a direct acting e-locker 4, which does not seem to have the shortcomings, but it's only available for the Dana 60 and 70, and because of its size, it's very unlikely the one in the Grenadier. I would think ARB will eventually develop an air locker for the Grenadier, but again, I can't see that happening in a hurry. I also heard that you need to specify the differential lock when the vehicle is built, as if you want to add them at a later date, it will be way more costly as you also need new axles. So from my experience, Ineos has chosen the least reliable and desirable differential lock for a purpose-built four-wheel drive and something I definitely would want to replace. However, no one knows if and when there will be a better option available. There are still a few other more minor ergonomical issues. For instance, I don't think having the main instrument cluster with your speedo not right in front of the driver but offset in the middle console is a good idea. While I like the idea of the overhead control and switchboard, as Ineos said, it's kind of cool. Is it practical though? The idea comes from large aircrafts where there is not enough space for all controls in the dashboard and in front of the pilot, and the pilot can take its eyes off the flight path due to autopilot. In a car, you must take your eyes completely off the road or track to operate the switches. I have limited buttons and my UHFs in my cruiser's overhead console, and to make any changes is definitely more distracting than operating buttons in the dash. So from an ergonomical and safety perspective, I'm not sure where the roof controls are a good idea, especially for often used buttons and switches. I definitely do like the idea of the pre-wired auxiliary switches in the roof console though, but I'm a bit surprised that there is no provision for UHF, as it is something which most four-wheel drivers will install in their vehicle. I was really not impressed by the ground clearance of the Grenadier. The undercarriage is very messy and cramped with horizontal offset driveshaft angles and many very low-hanging parts. For instance, the already small 90-liter fuel tank hangs well below the frame. And overall, I find they have tried to keep the body way too low to the chassis for a purpose-built four-wheel drive. It's a fine line of keeping the center of gravity down, but also allow enough room under the body to tuck things like the tank away. The transmission cooler in the front is super low hanging and will collect plenty of dust and mud. Given the fact that the most people who take their four-wheel drive off-road will go for a 2-inch lift, I'm a bit surprised that Ineos would have not factored that in and released it with a little more height. I'm also a little concerned about how the Grenadier will behave if you lift it any further, as the control arms are already very short and a further lift may result in unfavorable angles and on and off-road behavior. Of course, the only way to get the undercarriage and low-hanging parts off the ground at this stage would be bigger tires. While we have seen Sir Jim Ratcliff's Grenadier on 35s, we have not seen any information how this has been done. Whacking 35s under vehicle is easy, however to do it properly requires more effort. Ensuring that you have clearance for the 35-inch tires and that drive shafts, CVs, axles are strong enough to cope with additional strain. In most cars you also want to re-gear the diffs to bring it back to factory ratios. But that is all information we unfortunately don't have. I emailed Ineos with a few questions about axle ratings, gearing and the likes, but unfortunately never received a response. So in this area I will be watching with interest and see how it develops and what people get away with once a car is on the market. I'm also interested to know what would be required to get the Grenadier engineered on 33s or 35s in Australia. The Grenadier has a very similar 5-link front suspension setup to the Jeep JK and JL. Both JK and JL are quite susceptible to a dead wobble, which I personally had on my Jeep JK. It took a fair while to isolate and fix the cause. If you wonder how common it is, do a YouTube search for Jeep dead wobble. In a video Ineos released and what must have slipped past their vetting, I saw the Grenadier displaying a pretty severe dead wobble. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the Grenadier will be released with a dead wobble. However, if it is as susceptible to it as for instance a Jeep JK, that would be a concern for me, especially for a touring vehicle.
Reliability, serviceability and parts availability. Obviously, that is all something which we really don't know, and the vehicle will need to be in customers' hands, will need to be driven to see how reliable it really is. From the component side, I haven't too many concerns. However, other car manufacturers have failed in the past to produce reliable cars. So for Ineos to make the first car super reliable would be a big feat, but time will tell. I have to say I'm a little concerned about the service network though. If you look at the map, you see that all the service centers are pretty much around the coast of Australia and there's not a single service center in the middle of Australia. And while Ineos does provide a service manual and you are supposed to be able to self-repair it, I have been there with my Land Rover Defenders where are broken down in the outback and local mechanics would send me away. They said, we're not going to look at that vehicle, we're not servicing it. So with the Ineos Grenadier being a new vehicle, there is certainly a concern that it will be similar. And given that there is not a single service center anywhere in the interior of Australia, I'm keen to see how that pans out for people. There are a few interesting decisions Ineos made, for instance, to only include a red winch on the vehicle, which cost over $5,000. Don't get me wrong, red winches are great winches and they're well known in the competition scene.
But in 10 years of four-wheel driving, I yet have to come across one on a regular four-wheel drive. While a great winch, I think it is a very expensive option for an already overpriced vehicle.
I also heard that you can't fit a regular low-mount winch into the Ineos bull bar and that Red had to make a very customized version for it. So that means at this stage you either buy a $5,500 Red winch or you have likely no winch. I reckon a good Warn for half the price would have also done the job very well.
Future terrain, we've got quite a steep descent coming up. I can literally just drop it into first gear on the Tiptronic.
So we're in first, low, centre diff lock.
Yeah, and
foot off everything?
Off the brakes, yeah, foot off everything, and that's got perfect vehicle control. and that is gold standard as far as I'm concerned.
Look, no disrespect to Mark Collum, who I think is a professional rally driver, and I've personally have never driven rallies. But one thing I can tell you, it is definitely not the gold standard for a four-wheel drive and for a regular off-road vehicle. And the driver mentions that the car is in full control, but to be honest, if that is the gearing of first gear low range, it would be way too fast for me. I reckon that looks like first gear high range, not low range. Any unforeseen obstacle or hole and there would be no way to react with the vehicle going so fast. That was also one of the reasons why I requested the gear ratios from Ineos, but I never got a reply back in that regards, unfortunately. I noticed that Ineos experts sometimes seem to have only superficial knowledge about the product they are talking. A professional rally driver may appear knowledgeable to the layman, but is not necessarily knowledgeable about general four-wheel driving and modern four-wheel drive features and their operations. Rally driving is quite the opposite of driving a regular four-wheel drive in more technical terrain, where safety and slow speed is the go and not high speed. In another segment of the video, Mark Collum also mentioned that hill descent control is only available in high range.
There is a hill descent control on this for when you're in high range.
Right.
So if you was in high range, you could use a hill HDC button.
Right. Hill descent control would make little sense in high range, and anyone knowing the technology would know that. When I questioned these with Ineos, I was told it was a mistake and hill descent control will be available in low and high range as you would expect. I also would like to give a quick shout out to Robert Pepper. He is an Australian car journalist. He also has written a book on four-wheel driving and is pretty well regarded in the industry. I have had quite a few forth and back chats with him and bounce off some of my findings, and I think we both agree in the majority of things I stated in this video. So thanks, Robert. Well, let's talk about the pricing, as that is definitely way higher than anticipated. Let's face it, no matter the four-wheel drive, pretty much all of them require further modifications and additional spending. However, the Grenadier was supposed to be different. As a purpose-built four-wheel drive, I did expect that it ticks all the basic four-wheel drive boxes. However, that is not the case, because for instance, diff locks are not included in the base model. There is no extended fuel tank option available. You are also stuck between a rock and a hard place regarding how spec'd up you order the car. If you purchase the base model and like to make the required modifications with third-party parts to save some money or have gear which suits you better, you likely will need a fair bit of time, as at present no aftermarket parts are available. Personally, I think it may take a year or two before companies will start producing aftermarket gear for the Grenadier. So if you want to use the Grenadier as soon as possible, you need to purchase, say, the Fieldmaster edition and include all the off-road extras like the $5,000 Red Winch. I spec'd up the Fieldmaster edition without any luxuries, and the drive-away price was over $129,000, which does not include any of the luxuries like leather seats. In my opinion, to make it a capable off-road tourer though, it would need further modifications. For instance, I was not impressed by the stock suspension. While not terrible, it was also not great. I have to say though, I'm probably a little spoiled with my cruiser and Jeep suspension setups I have and had. So I definitely would want a 2-inch lift with better adjustable remote reservoir shocks. So at least another 5k on top of the 125k. I also would want a rear bar with a dual swing-away carrier, so I can carry the spare as well as an additional 2 jerry cans. At another around 4k. I definitely would want a set of 35-inch tires to give you a little more clearance for all the low-hanging parts. At another 4k. In addition, you may need to re-gear the diffs, possibly upgrade the drive shaft, CVs. That are all expenses we don't know yet because we have no information about these parts. I definitely would need a second fuel tank to get me to at least 180 liters of fuel, so you can add another 3k. With a few other bits and pieces like the electrical setup, drawers, UHF, I easily would need another 30k of modifications, which would bring the total cost to around 160,000 Australian dollar. Mind you, as I said before, at this stage no third-party options are available for any of this. 160k is a lot of dough for a yet unproven vehicle, and especially if you look around what else you can get in the market. As a comparison, the same money would buy me a brilliantly set up 70 series Land Cruiser or a brand new Nissan Patrol Y62 completely set up on 35s, long range fuel tanks and the like, and I still had 20k to spare for fuel or the likes. I think the Grenadier is overpriced for an unproven vehicle, especially as it just does not come out of the showroom ready to go, in my opinion. Please let me know in the comment section whether you reckon $129,000 is a fair price for a car with these specs. To be honest, so far the Grenadier did not turn out to be what I expected it to be. I assumed as a purpose-built four-wheel drive it would be a no-brainer. If you're in the market for a new four-wheel drive, the Grenadier would be sitting on top of the list. And while no car ticks all boxes, I really hope that the Grenadier would tick, say, 90% of boxes what you need in a four-wheel drive. However, in my opinion, that is definitely not the case at this stage. Does that mean I will never own or drive a Grenadier? Not at all, but at this stage I will wait for a year or two, see how everything pans out, how reliable the car is, what aftermarket gear will be available, and I will have a close look how the final seating position and footwell space will pan out. And maybe in a year or two I purchase one and start playing around with it with bigger tires and see how it can perform as a tourer. Given this is Ineos' first four-wheel drive, I hope they take feedback on board and that we see a future version that is a little less Europe-centric. I think it would be good expanding their field of experts to a few four-wheel drivers from other countries, and that they will eliminate the shortcomings in future models. After all, it's rarely ever that the first version of a product is perfect. And I give Sir Jim Ratcliffe a lot of credit for having the balls to create a four-wheel drive from scratch. Please keep in mind, once I get my hands on a Grenadier and can properly test it, I will be more than happy to revise anything I stated here in that video if it turns out to be different. Thanks again for watching, guys. I hope you got some useful information out of this video. If you have, please consider to share, like and subscribe, because as an independent creator it becomes harder and harder with all the increasing costs. If you can, maybe even consider heading over to Patreon or buy me a coffee and support my work with a cup of coffee or two per month. It would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you along the tracks.